A massive show of unity in Hong Kong as hundreds of thousands of protesters pour into the streets.
The siege of a major university is now in its 7th day as police surround a small number of
rejecting a New York Times report on the controversial detention centers in the western region of Xinjiang.
I think it is only a matter of time until the coronavirus starts to spread through communities here in the United States.
There are on the march. Tear gas now is in the air.
In fact, CNN's Anna Coren is in the crowd. She was actually hit by tear gas just a few minutes ago. Anna, first of all, you and the crew okay?
Chinese censorship, a violation of Article 19 of the Declaration of Human Rights. For decades, the Chinese government has censored its people time and time again. A prominent example being the events that took place in 1989, Tiananmen Square. Students began protesting the government as a response to inflation, as well as political and economic causes. The famous Tank Man image arose from these protests, which depicts a man standing up to a line of Chinese tanks. Hundreds of students were killed, with thousands being injured, and the government has worked towards covering the whole situation up to this day. This single occurrence begs a wider question. If China is willing to attempt to hide an entire massacre, what else could they be possibly hiding? In recent times, two subjects stand out: the protests in Hong Kong and the coronavirus. Protests in Hong Kong began in April 2019 when a new bill was introduced which would allow for the extradition of suspected criminals to mainland China. Citizens of Hong Kong feared this would lead to unfair trials and violent treatment of the suspects, so protests broke out. As the year went on, protests grew in numbers, eventually peaking to a staggering 2 million people. Protesters developed 5 non-negotiable demands: retraction of the riot characterization of the protests, release and exoneration of arrested protesters, establishment of an independent commission of inquiry into police conduct and use of force during the protests, the implementation of universal suffrage for legislative councils, elections, and for the election of a chief executive, and finally, complete withdrawal of the extradition bill from the legislative process. Only one demand has been met, with the repeal of the extradition bill in early September of last year. Since the protests began, Chinese censorship has run rampant, as well as multiple cases of police misconduct. Back in the mainland China, authorities are actively ensuring word of the protests don't spread. Also, violence between protesters and law enforcement have been taking place, resulting in deaths on both sides. Chinese censorship doesn't stop with Hong Kong, unfortunately. Currently, China is suspected of actively covering up one of the world's biggest potential threats, the coronavirus. In a span of less than 2 months, the virus has gone from infecting a handful of people to a total of 75,000. However, these are just the amount of confirmed cases so far. Critics argue that China is hiding the true severity of the infection, claiming that upwards of 500,000 are potentially infected. China chooses to hide these numbers to prevent their economy from feeling the effects of mass panic. This presents a problem, since World Health Organizations can't take the necessary precautions without fully understanding the true severity of the virus. So, why should we care? Why does any of this matter? Extreme censorship should be taken seriously, as it is an early warning sign of worse things to come. Think back to Nazi Germany. When Hitler rose to power in the early 30s, he established the Ministry of Propaganda to control exactly what sort of media people of Germany consumed. During this time, many books, scientists, news sources, and more were censored in order to brainwash the general public into aligning with Nazi viewpoints. Censorship is a powerful tool. Fortunately for us, so is our money. One thing we can do to directly gain China's attention is to boycott their products. By putting a dent in the Chinese economy, they will be put in a position where they have to choose what's more important to them: violating multiple human rights as well as censoring the truth from their citizens or their nation's economy. Another key action we must take is raising awareness of the situation at hand. Many people are blissfully unaware of what the Chinese government has been responsible for in the past few decades, from the Great Leap Forward to Tiananmen Square protests to their modern-day internment camps, which have imprisoned hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs for no just reason. This is a bipartisan problem, no matter where your political stance lies. You have to agree that the Chinese government cannot be left unchecked for much longer. It's time we, as American citizens, stand up for what we believe in: freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and equal rights for all.